The merit behind engaging more with the genre of alternate history is something that I've been thinking about a lot as I play these mods and write these essays. History is a constructed narrative, a tool used for teaching and preserving knowledge about events told to us through dedicated research, and yet is really only understood and recounted through several degrees of separation, be it time, translation, new information, etc. That, in turn, is one more degree removed during the transmission between the historical media and its consumer. This makes the very nature of history both perfect for our uses and flawed in its utility. To have a historical understanding of something, one requires this separation in order to place things in a greater context and sequence of events. The history of why a war is happening is of little consequence to a civilian running for shelter during a bomb strike, or looking for food in the wreckage left after. The labor strikes in a country that in turn flare up into revolution is not about the eternal struggles of class warfare to the ones caught in the crossfire. That's more for the historian or the philosopher, and less for the workers stuck in their plowshares to swords situation. When we look back on these things through the lens of history, we have these visceral gaps in knowledge and experience. Going back to bridge those gaps between visceral and historical understandings of history is one of the benefits behind historical video games. And even though I think the intention there varies widely, it still acts as a learning tool, an interactive medium, and an art form all at once. This is wide open to disagreement, by the way. The amount of revisionism you see in some games is a conversation all on its own. This is also true to different degrees through different titles, where the intention and execution are both, you guessed it, different. In a ton of, if not all, historical games, you get alternate history. Even in the few that are reaching into the realm of almost painstaking accuracy, like the multiplayer Civil War game War of Rights, which replicates the areas where the battles of the 1862 Maryland campaign took place. Having the same divisions and weapons represented on those battlefields still often leaves a lot, such as the ways units are positioned and used or the result of each battle, open to collective player input. After each battle, there are bits of historical narration that accompany the transition to another match. Here, you find plenty of non-historical elements, like different game modes and a few battles thrown in that didn't really take place, that are still justified in the same degree of believability that you get with the rest of the Maryland campaign. This only takes a hard turn into the ridiculous for about 1 month a year, where a zombies mode gets added. In Hearts of Iron 4, when following the historical paths, you will almost definitely have to take an ahistorical route at some point to get the upper hand on the rest of the world, no matter which nation you select. Beyond the complex strategy and numbers of Hoi 4, there is also a vast web of possible decisions and narratives that pulls the AI in different directions as the players engage with it. Those historical paths are usually flanked by other options, changing ideologies and alliances to see how things play out as, say, communist Germany or fascist Canada. The secret leaders paths that are hidden completely from view but still present is one of my favorite examples of this. For instance, you can replace whatever human is currently occupying the throne of Poland with a bear. My appreciation for alternate history at its best came from watching the lovely and talented Stakuyi, who explains in his videos covering both mods and the base game that alternate history, when done right, doesn't start and stop at a simple question like, what if Japan never did Pearl Harbor? But should be discussed more in depth by considering both the different causes or circumstances leading up to the split from our own timeline and the effects that play out in the hypothetical one. With Hearts of Iron, your options aren't quite unlimited, but they sure feel that way once you get into this territory. While recreating those scenarios, we begin utilizing this already strange tool of the historical video game in even more interesting ways. The grand merit, in essence, is that to participate in the writing and playing of these alternate histories puts one deeper into both the visceral and historical understanding at the same time. It shows a deeper appreciation and knowledge of these things on the part of its creators to be consumed by those who also share on some level a fascination with how we got where we are. To look back on how things could have turned out dramatically different is a topic we never seem to get tired of discussing through the media of video games. Those more nuanced discussions are what you find in the alternate history mods. And today we are talking about the most famous one of all, Kaiserreich. While it's the third entry in the I Have Thoughts series I've been doing, it's also the first half of a split 2-part essay on both this and Kaiser Redux. That will be among future videos, but I run the risk of repeating myself a lot between those halves, so we'll see what Pax Britannica and Napoleonic Wars and the New Order look like, and I'll get back to you. Oh yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the New Order, don't you worry about that. 2 last quick things. First, an update and the required stuff I have to say. If you'd like to help support the channel, I opened a Patreon recently and got my YouTube partnership. Links are in the channel description along with the Discord. Remember to like and share, you know the drill. And second, as always, thank you so much for watching. It means the world to me. You have all been a great help in making this channel into something. Alright, so anyway. Kaiserreich. At first glance, on the surface, Kaiserreich takes few risks with its design. I'd gotten used to being visually assaulted by the user interface and color schemes in some of these other conversion mods, but not here. Most things are made to look as close to the base game as possible, with the tiny exception, as is tradition, of just amazing opening illustrated graphics. I sure do talk about these a lot, but I'm also constantly restarting the game, so I see them more than probably your average player. I don't think I've come across a mod I'm covering yet that has not blown me away with these, and so I always like to highlight the effort. Like the UI, Kaiserreich's imagery is kind of reminiscent of the base games, only with a bit more of a graphic novel look to it. The broader range of scenes you see are evocative of the many different styles of game you can end up playing. At least for me, they always feel this way. You have images of desperate battles, of conquered cities draped in the flags of invading armies, soldiers gathered around a mess hall table, typical fare. Then, of what looks like resistance or special forces fighters hunkered in industrial-looking complexes or standing in the tree lines of a tropical jungle. It may be a reach, but I get all of these stories and questions that pop into my head opening up the mod that take me back to my excitement of my very first ever experiences with Hoi 4. When a good portion of the gameplay loop and conversion mods are going to be replicated beat for beat, it becomes imperative that the style and mood be emphasized to stand out. And I think that Kaiserreich may struggle here and there with that, but at the same time, I'm so glad that for as dense of reading and strategizing I'm about to be doing, I don't also have to contend with relearning, like, icons. Also, the developers may have been working under the wise assumption that the player will install any mods to change the way the game looks that they want, so they didn't really need to touch it. The impressions that I get from these scenes are more encompassing than the other mods I've played so far, more in line again with the base game's broader goal of showing World War II in all of its forms, and Kaiserreich's goal of being a more thorough total conversion. This is opposed to the comparatively narrow themes of mods like Red Flood or The Fire Rises, which have set their fixations on changing more specific elements while taking much larger creative liberty with the visuals. Which is not to say that Kaiserreich doesn't come with its weird hang-ups and obsessions that separate it from the base game, otherwise I'd have little to talk about. Since so much of the gameplay within looks almost exactly like base Hoi 4, I feel like the benefit of going the extra mile with the introductory graphics to set the tone is surpassed only by the depth and variety of narrative you find within the mod. This is where Kaiserreich is hiding all of its strangeness. Kaiserreich begins in 1936, the same year as regular Hoi 4, and contains three very general questions that make up its gameplay. 1. What would the result of a Central Powers victory in World War I look like geopolitically? 2. What then would be the circumstances leading up to and catalyst for World War II? 3. What will the world look like after it's done? This is oversimplifying things a lot, but I think of these as the basic roadmap of progression. You begin by learning about your nation's place in the world in the form of a pop-up window that has both this and the guide for your country's different political paths it can go down. This information can range from 3-ish to 10 pages and is all optional reading, but I do not recommend skipping it unless you really don't give a shit how things turn out. I've tried both approaches and really favor not skipping the intro and using it as a reference tool through my game. There's still plenty of guesswork you get to do in between to keep you on your toes. Once you've figured out your general situation, you begin building off of that until the war breaks out, then trying to contend with that the best you can, if you haven't collapsed before. I'm focusing on the first two of those questions because there's a lot of nation-specific playthrough videos you can watch with, of course, as many different results, and also, I've never made it far enough in to see the big peace conferences at the end. I wanted to get a feel for what a wider variety of countries' focuses and stories were like, and so I hopped into a bunch of different nations and played them into the Second Weltkrieg, or World War, but not beyond it. While I won't pretend to understand even a majority of the names and places that I read about in the introduction to each country, they are still fun to take inspiration from and guidance. Each one has enough detail as to feel like you're reading a believable summary of a real history. A thing I like to sit and imagine sometimes is the sheer amount of research and knowledge flexing that must be done in these writing teams when they come up with the details of events and background info, and how to incorporate it into the mod. It's an appealing image. So, the world situation. As you already know, in this timeline, Germany won World War I. This is due to several factors, one of the main being that the United States ultimately refused the call to action and stayed out of the conflict. With the recent and very tenuously victorious Bolsheviks in Russia bowing out so they can deal with the ongoing civil war they helped create, France and the United Kingdom are left alone to hold the Western Front against Germany's now concentrated army. Soon, France collapses under the losses, and the United Kingdom eventually has no choice but to surrender. What soon follows are shifts in power too many and specific to get into individually, but for a while, Germany and its allies are the undisputed superpowers, while the defeated nations undergo radical changes in leadership and ideology. The same way the shattered Central Powers would turn away from their monarchies and largely to fascism before our own World War II, most of the defeated allies turned to socialism. I know I just said that there isn't really a singular catalyst for World War II in Kaiserreich. As with all wars, there are signs that stability is eroding fast. The major stock market crash of the German economy, named Black Monday, acts as one of these. Since they are the eminent power in Europe, it ends up affecting the entire world, save for the isolated economies. Even though most countries are already contending with plenty of their own internal issues, this is the first sign that internationally things are beginning to turn sour. With a weakened German empire busy fixing its economy, the time for plotting against them and building separate alliances is at hand. Something that's very interesting to me is how the world map looks after a Central Powers victory. There's really not as much change as I thought there would be. There are notable differences, but it's not like Great Britain just ceased to exist after they lost the war or something. Russia is the same behemoth it always is. I suppose small differences that speak volumes may be a good way of describing it. The city of Danzig is comfortably within the German Empire's borders, for instance, so no real need to invade Poland, as if there ever was one. Rather than having a new, somewhat independent nations between the Balkans and Belorussia, there are several buffer states belonging to Germany, pulling the reverse card on the old Russians. I really don't know how big of an oversimplification this is, and as a disclaimer, I am probably wrong about this. But from reading the chapter on World War I of Donald Kagan's book, The Origins of War, I come away with this cynical impression that most major European wars fought post-Napoleon and pre-1914 were basically wars fought over elbow room in the name of nationalism and unification. We are more used to thinking of wars in the terms of total war, and while these did happen before World War I, it was less often the case. I keep being grimly surprised looking at how these maps of the world looked after such major conflicts, and how little has changed between them when you zoom way out and look down on things from the space eye view a map gives. These minor changes to things to be slightly more in the favor of the Central Powers feels very realistic when you compare the results of wars from our own history. All that said, what's more interesting to me than the ways the borders changed is the ways that the ideas inside of them have. I talked in the Red Flood video about how simplistic the ideology system can be in the regular game. I had heard about the more detailed ways that politics are divided up between more specific ideologies in Kaiserreich, but I wasn't exactly sure what that meant. I'd also heard that there were a lot more restrictions and events that are tied to political paths, but I didn't understand how much emphasis it would put on this stuff until I experienced it for myself. There are 10 distinct ideologies in this mod compared to the base game's 4. So, it's a bit more complex. Like so many other elements in Kaiserreich, the political divisions make for interesting gameplay that both fixes and confuses things, while also being a learning tool. The names and descriptions of some political branches are enough to go on, like Radical Socialist was pretty explanatory, and I had logicked out that paternal autocracy was more or less a monarchy, which was more or less correct. Others, like social conservative, market liberal, and totalist, are somewhat harder for me to understand, as evidenced by the fact that I still don't. One that I found really interesting for how contradictory it sounded is authoritarian democracy, and then I read about it on the wiki and went, ah shit. In practice, having all of these branches translates into jockeying for position both among your own coalition and the broader competition for national leadership. Here you don't get to use the base game's system of hire guy, watch bubble change, pick civil war or peaceful transition, method of flipping ideologies. The paths here feel more like a choose-your-own-adventure story, selected both through focuses and events that come with a reference tool if you don't want to just guess your entire way through. I use the reference window a bit more often than I don't, usually half following along for a while and then going off on my own to see what happens. I wouldn't even say that this simplifies things in the beginning, as you really have no idea how things are going to play out on the wider world stage. The amount of both structure and variety among options makes Kaiserreich feel like the most fine-tuned and thought out of any of the mods I've played so far. Each nation had its own detailed story and had the potential to switch leaders and paths, sometimes going through multiple regime changes to land on the desired one. I think that in general this works both in favor of and against the mod, which is the same way I feel about its more complex politics in general. The reason, however, is much simpler than you'd think, and comes down mostly just to what I'm feeling like doing on Hoi 4 that day. Sometimes I just don't want to play something this complicated. Cheesing the simplistic politics and flipping your country straight into unprescribed chaos is more a feature of the base game to me than a shortcoming. But this in no way diminishes my appreciation for Kaiserreich's effort to keep things in line with their vision. Speaking of which, here we have similar restrictions on justifying war goals and sending volunteers that you find in other mods. While some people, namely my multiplayer group, think game rules like these are utter blasphemy, I'm usually more interested to see why the game wants me to hold off getting to declare until I get a particular focus or event that gives me almost immediate war goals. I'm never sure if they do this to prevent upsetting the game balance, or if it's a narrative thing, or both. The only time I really end up frustrated by this mechanic is when there's no clear indication at all as to who I'm going to have beef with, and should be preparing against. I think that this only happened once by the actual game's doing, and twice I did it to myself because I didn't read focus trees clearly enough. Kaiserreich certainly demands vigilance from its players, but rewards you by having so much interaction that even going down the wrong paths feels worthwhile. To me, the mod still feels immersive and alive because of these levels of care and detail, even as it presents tremendous challenges in almost everything it tackles. Alright, if you made it this far in, here's your reward. Here comes the best part. The obligatory and much abridged list of ways I fucked up playing some of my favorite nations so far. Who should I start with? Oh, I know. The Ottoman Empire, more than most, is the nation I am obsessed with getting right, and also the one I am almost definitely the worst at, which is saying a lot. No matter if it's between Kaiserreich or the Great War, playing the Ottomans first is just a reflexive move at this point, not even a conscious decision. I'm writing and potentially releasing this half of the two-part essay before I even try Kaiser Redux, but you could put money on it that the first nation I try will be the goddamn Ottoman Empire. The thing that I find really interesting about playing countries in Africa, the Levant, and the Middle East, and the reason I really like the Graveyard of Empires DLC, is I am drawn to the idea of trying to reestablish an empire out of the most ancient parts of civilization while working to remain a world power that lasts from one age to the next. In history class way back in elementary or middle school, I remember learning that the Ottoman Empire was ancient, lasted into the 20th century, and participated in World War I, which was fascinating to me, and that's all. I never learned much about it later on through school or through my own interest, but being the last of the ancient empires in the modern world is something I've found to be a part of history that, for as cool as that is to me, I never learned about enough. Getting to play as this entity in a video game in order to start that process was not something I ever saw happening, but whether it's through those interesting long-term goals you find tucked sometimes in your decision menu, or through the focuses of new DLC paths, and most importantly to this essay, alternative history mods, establishing an ancient empire from scratch in the modern-ish day has become one of the most rewarding parts of the game. The same way that seeing how far you can push a country into the modern day using tech trees, template design, and foci? You can also take a country ideologically all the way back to the 12th century and deliver this ideology to your unwilling neighbors in the latest mechanized vehicles. That's astounding. All of the content you see about the Ottoman Empire really emphasizes the whole sick man of Europe thing, which, as the name suggests, means you get a whole basket full of setbacks to, well, just about everything. Shrinking borders, widespread illiteracy, a collapsing government, open revolt among the subjects. What's not to love? I think in general, as good as it feels to begin a major country with a strong economy and worry less about building up, most players would agree there's a lot of fun to be had choosing countries with all of these negative modifiers and trying like hell to turn it into something powerful. The precariousness of your situation is almost visually apparent when you see your nonsensical borders. The map of the Ottoman Empire looks like you dropped an egg on uneven ground. You have territory in Europe, Africa, all down the Arabian Peninsula, and reaching into Southwest Asia. Rather than having even defensible borders, you're overextended in almost every direction. This comes accompanied by the constant reminders and events detailing how bad of a job you're doing at balancing the discontent of all your various colonies, territories, and puppets. One by one, those who can grant themselves autonomy leave your withered grasp and are immediately snatched up by the growing, newer powers that surround you. I've gotten much more used to playing the nations dealing with civil unrest and potential schisms, and the Ottoman Empire is basically the final boss of that whole playstyle. To keep things simple, I can just give the basic chronology for my two more or less identical attempts. The goal each time was to build up as quickly as possible while trying to keep the internal pressure from exploding and trying to make friends with all of my neighbors. The result is that everyone attacks me regardless. And I do mean every fucking one, even my own puppets. You get small wars against separatist movements springing up all over the country, namely Kurdistan and Syria, roughly around the same time that Iran and Egypt declare on you, with the very real possibility, I'm almost done, of the four smaller countries, Yemen, Ha'il, Georgia, and Azerbaijan joining in. That is a friendless war on all fronts, and I haven't had much success in handling it so far with my rinky-dink cavalry divisions, and whatever I can extract from my puppets before they come to collect. I don't need to know a whole lot of the details of Ottoman history to get the idea that we have been some piss-poor diplomats over the years. There hasn't been an attempt made yet that felt great at the beginning, only for catastrophe to strike and for me to end up with a headache. I haven't tried it that many times, and I know there has to be some aspect I'm missing or path I'm choosing that's making things harder on myself. For me, the Ottoman Empire, almost more than any other nation, represents the higher difficulties on the learning curve of Kaiserreich because so far I haven't encountered another country with so many different external pressures. It reminds me of a comment that I really wish I could remember the origins of, but where a person said they play Hoi 4 as a roguelike, getting a little further each time before they do something to mess up and have to start over. That comment has stuck with me ever since I read it, and thinking about the game in that way has helped me feel more comfortable experimenting with crazy ideas, or playing these rough-ass nations, and never minding much when they don't work. I always do a little better each time I go back and play the game in general, and playing a nation with so little margin for error has made that progress even more apparent. Because it will definitely let you know you fucked up. You'll know how badly once you're being invaded from every direction.
Rock-flagged eagle!
Having failed to assert itself by remaining steadfastly neutral in the Great War, the United States has found itself increasingly shut out of the conversations between powers in the generations since, and those failures both domestically and abroad are beginning to outgrow the isolated stability we valued over the call to preserve the balance of power in Europe. This is something I only learned later on. The first time I tried playing the US, I clicked right through the opening, didn't read the paths, nothing. It's the Americans, how hard can it really be? I was correct at first, then I wasn't. I did notice that I was making a ton of political decisions between two separate groups that were vying for power with my current administration, the America First Party and the Socialists. Yeah, no, hard pass on both. I was brilliantly balancing the decisions between favoring each so that they stayed deadlocked at around 15% power. Master politician stuff. Since so many of the focuses weren't available until something called Victory in the Second Civil War was achieved, probably the most vague title I've ever heard, I didn't think too much about things outside of the economic reconstruction. Playing as America is very often a waiting game, so that's what I had prepared myself for. You don't have nearly the same amount of setbacks in Kaiserreich due to the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl is entirely absent here, And so getting my economy started wasn't the issue. My issue was beginning the game thinking, I'm about to navy the fuck out of this thing, and focusing solely on that, laughing maniacally as I boosted my naval powers beyond belief and ignored pretty much everything else. For those of you who have played Kaiserreich, you know what happens next. I was doing some stuff to stave off the depression, which was made worse by Black Monday, but mostly the idea was to make an unbelievable amount of ships and lock down all the oceans. I was going to build early, join early, dominate the field early. Then my entire country collapsed into civil war, I was overrun in short order, and my favorite admiral even defected to the other side. What the actual fuck, dude? I get the Civil War part, but leave me my favorite boat guy. You also lose your hold on Hawaii and the other Pacific islands and Panama, which all makes sense. Long live the Kingdom of Hawaii. Idiocy aside, I think playing a longer game as the United States, meaning as any of its factions, getting through your civil war, and rebuilding in time to join whichever side of the global conflict that you choose to back sounds like a very fun arc to play through, but I haven't gone back and done it yet, partially in the interest of getting more of these crash and burn anecdotes together. It certainly tracks that you get to play the same strong country that will eventually get to join World War II, just with a bunch of extra difficult steps first. That's Kaiserreich in a nutshell. I think while playing each of the nations on the outside looking into the United States, I received decisions to send material support to some faction of the Civil War besides the usual lend-leasing or sending volunteers. I'm both confused and impressed by this overall story beat in Kaiserreich. Impressed because of a second Civil War is rarely unwelcome in our war games. I'm confused by it because I'm not sure how believable a full-scale Civil War would be at the time, but I'm not questioning it too much. More war for everyone. Mainly, I really like the idea that in order to get this major nation on your side when the Second Weltkrieg begins, you're going to have to work for it and help them out of their situation. When I realized what the game wanted me to do with America and how to fit into the story, it was revelatory. It drove the feeling home that everything feels like it's moving at once in Kaiserreich. There are no sleeping giants. Instead, they just thrash in their chains. Choosing to either ignore it for more pressing matters or getting to help decide America's fate before it comes back and returns the favor is really one of my favorite parts of Kaiserreich's story. Russia has suffered is the sentence that begins its backstory. After succeeding in staving off Bolshevism and falling under the unstable power of a dictator, the next steps in the empire's path become some of the most consequential for the entire world. From the beginning, you'll get to steer the balance of power in one of the many possible directions it has laid out. I had a hard time following a lot of the names on my first playthrough, but my interest was through the roof, so this was a country I stuck with to see what happened on multiple attempts. I won't go into all of them, but we will talk about most of the important stuff. Russia was the happy middle ground between feeling a bit useless as the United States and actively fighting my own subjects as the Ottoman Empire. Not only do you have a ton of starting divisions, just under 100, but they're good divisions. Your templates aren't completely embarrassing, that took me like 4 takes, and you have a decent industry to back it up from the start. This is almost unbelievable for a person like me, who is obsessed with the more remote minor nations, or majors that are way far behind the times. I think also playing a Germany as world power game where every one of the enemy nations aren't scratching in the dirt is always going to be a pleasant surprise. Now, with all of that said, I still would not call it an easy time. Just because you start with things kind of in your favor, that comes with no guarantee that you'll know how to handle it. I didn't. I wasn't able to make much room in any of the wars I was sending volunteers into, which, yeah, classic me, not the game moment. Luckily, I wasn't being challenged too much domestically, besides hemorrhaging stability while I was trying to put my economy back together and balance anger between the military and public. Cool mechanic, by the way. There weren't any focuses that I saw that did much to shore that up in the short term, so I just didn't worry about it. Now, having accidentally deleted that save, later on I went back through the path guide and decided instead to either bring about another wave of Bolshevism, or to try and reinstate something like a monarchy. This takes mostly navigating the path guide, and much to my relief, didn't result in an all-out civil war. Russia is just too damn much territory to have to fight over, especially with half your army. The radical socialist path seemed to be going the smoothest, which, thanks to Kaiserreich's infinitely complex political system, is separate from the Bolshevism I was aiming for. Thanks a lot, guys. One neat thing you get to do is decide if a lower-level officer named Stalin, something like that, lives or dies for some big infraction he pulls. Of course, I couldn't help myself. I stuck with it up until about 1940 and was able to put myself into a relatively strong position. While I was working toward completing a lot of these earlier game goals, I started thinking, man, this is a little late to be starting the Second War. Where is it? Then I read through some of the next focuses down my tree and realized I was the one meant to declare on the Reichspakt and begin the Second Weltkrieg. That was fine and all, except I hadn't really prepared my military, and I lost what was supposed to be a secret ally at the start of the war to meddling on the Germans' part. This was pretty discouraging, but I think it's due to me still not understanding what sort of time frame I'm working with, so I got scared and bailed out. I really have to try this one again sometime soon. I keep hearing that sticking with the starting dictator guy is an interesting route, but I'm always tempted to roll with those rascally communists. I had resisted the following along with any other content creators' playthroughs, but I will when going back to figure out how to handle the Russian Empire. Japan sits near or even at the top of my favorite countries to play as in Kaiserreich, and may be the most fun I have had so far with the entire mod. I haven't paid nearly enough attention to Asia in most of my videos or playthroughs, maybe because I could never get playing as China correct in the base game and kept getting discouraged. Maybe it's because my knowledge of actual history in the region is also painfully lacking, and so alternate histories are even more indecipherable. All of that's changed dramatically playing as the Empire of Japan. Japan comes with a ton of backstory. I haven't read it yet in its entirety, but the history section on the wiki is long and detailed. I look forward to it, but to keep it simple for the video, you already pretty much know the drill. Things are growing just as unstable here as they are everywhere else, and from the first months you're put at the crossroads to paths that either change governments into a democracy, or revert back into a hyper-imperialism that I simply cannot resist choosing every time. If there's not going to be an Axis to join, I'll just make my own, with mahjong and opium. Once I was locked into putting the Emperor back in full command of the government, I still had to balance the upset power between the different branches of influence. I greatly favored the militaristic Kodaha faction, intending to put us on full war footing as quickly as possible. This came with spectacularly powerful sounding bonuses to producing weapons, and modifying my basic divisions to be able to navigate the different terrains we'd be fighting through. Suddenly, I was creating those specialized forces straight out of the opening graphics. I was outfitting a navy that would put those infighting Americans at the bottom of the ocean. I was thriving. A stone's throw away, Russia is gathering at its eastern border. The somewhat friendly and dependent Fengxian government is escalating tensions with all of the cliques from Beijing southward. Conflict between the disparate warlords of China continues, stomping out the weaker tribes and unifying into a handful of serious threats. Eventually, you can begin to form your war plans against each of the different nations, even beyond mainland China into places like the Philippines, Australasia, and the Dutch East Indies. It is truly unfortunate for my first attempt to fall apart the way it did. For as close attention as I paid to everything else, the thing that undid me was forgetting to build stupid convoys. Tons of hard work that maybe could have been fixed, but I was even more excited to begin once more, and this time I didn't miss much. I would liken preparing the Empire of Japan in Kaiserreich to a slightly less domineering Germany in the base game. You are well set up for a lot of different playstyles, easily favoring aggression either on the mainland or island hopping your way down to take over Australasia and the East Indies. Eventually, after securing a lot of the other Pacific Island nations in my co-Prosperity Sphere faction, a final war of unification started between the Chinese governments, and I decided to help my somewhat allied Fengxian government friends. The war, and its following peace deal, are my greatest achievements thus far in Kaiserreich. For as challenging as it was, it felt for the first time like I was running on all cylinders with something that could actually challenge and then beat the AI. Combining some really daring, code word for dumb, naval invasions paid off in splitting the new now defending army from the northern front, and I was able to get tons of encirclements one by one, microing my way southward. At one point at the beginning, we had something like 70 divisions wrapped up, and even that didn't seem to stop them, but it was the first of what would become a sequence. We were encircling smaller and smaller groups to greater effect while their lines thinned, and one by one the enemy nations fell. The peace conference was where things got a little frustrating since I never figured I'd make it this far, and it was really late at night. I just kept refusing to give up anything until I came away with about 80% of what the Fengtians went to war over. Give it a little time and effort and I'll have the rest. The other political paths seemed no less interesting to me than going along with the imperialist route. The same thing you could say for any of the countries I've talked briefly about here. With Japan, there were some more democratic routes, and I would like to see how the game ends up splitting between the major factions. This was by no means an exhaustive list of the nations I tried or the ones available. This isn't even a fraction of the ones I'm interested in playing. One thing I'm really intrigued about is to see how far Kaiserreich goes, and if it loses any of that shine on its way there. But for now, I think I'm ready to wrap up my thoughts. More than most of the other mods I've covered so far in this series, Kaiserreich has been a challenge. It was a challenge to understand at first, and to get across what it was trying to tell me. It's a challenge now to finish this damn essay, because for all of this pontificating I've been doing, a veteran to the mod would, and should, sneer at how little I really know about it. It has challenged me to want to know more about this game, its mod, the history and ideas behind both, and the reasons why I'm so enthralled by all of this. Put more simply, Kaiserreich is difficult. But it's a good kind of difficult, both demanding and interesting at the same time. With so much attention given to each of the unique countries, you get a surprising amount of mileage out of whatever you find the most appealing. No two countries I've played have felt the same, each coming with their own set of decisions and problems, and so far none of those I've found felt lacking or like I wasn't being challenged to really consider the consequences of my strategy, if you could call it that. As often as I felt the mod smacking my knuckles with the yardstick, I was also learning so much about what it is that I get out of playing these games. I could, and will, go on about some of the endless mini-games that are spread across the framework of Hoi 4 and these mods. Some technological, like the ship, plane, and tank designers I'm so enamored by. Others come in the form of decisions that are what amount to side quests that add even more variety and strategy. While most of these things could be simplified into dumping some of our currency into making a number go up or down, be it military XP, political power, etc. Rarely are they repeated in ways that are too alike narratively to seem like a waste of time to consider and read through. It seemed like every country got its own set of national interests, political quandaries, investments. You pretty much name it and there's a country dealing with it. The more you look, the harder it becomes to wrap your head around, even as you understand what's going on more, just how much nuance and variability can be done with the engine we play these strategy games out of. From my limited perspective, I think the story of this alternative history, and more importantly the number of stories that can be told from it, are guided by something that's either 1 degree more sophisticated than the base games, or it is doing a really damn good job masquerading as such. It is Hoi 4 refined, which, along with the other virtues of these mods, is one of the simplest things these conversions can be, but is so difficult to get right with such mastery as Kaiserreich's. I'm constantly left with the impression the developers took a close look at every part of the game, really thought about each of the features and tools, and figured out how they could be expanded on across the board to add more depth than most other conversions. I understand the more I play why so many people consider it to be one of, if not the best, Hearts of Iron 4 mod out there. I think that one of the things that makes this mod such a big deal, aside from the polish and quality of content it has, is that it is about how conflicts at the scope of a world war are never as simple as one side attacked the other so we all fought. While there will be some inciting violence that finally strikes the match, there are also variables and personalities, issues and incentives that drive the stakes to the extreme and make participation on some level mandatory. Beginning to ask those questions as you become infatuated with learning history leads to more questions. And once you begin to understand history, some of you cannot help but ask, well, what if it was different? Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys at the next one.